this wants to work now. I don't really see any reason that this is lacking other than maybe a cord. Yeah, my computer's not stressed at all, so let's see. Oh, seems to be working, but is like... Why is that such a problem? Is this going to work? Okay, it seems to be working now. All right, so what I wanted to cover this week was talking about why most businesses fail to grow. And a lot of businesses are perfectly decent at starting off with finding their first 5 customers. And then after that, there becomes a question of, are you hustling to get all of your new customers, or do you have a system in place to actually acquire new customers? Frequently, in my mind, this comes down to kind of the 2x mentality versus 10x mentality. This is something that was coined by, what's his name? Real estate guy. I don't know. Anyway. Grant Cardone. That's his name. So when I say aiming kind of more 10x versus 2x, what I mean is, like, take my own business, for example. Doing wealth management. I could go knock on doors for 12 hours a day, basically from sun up till sundown, trying to get people to buy my services. As part of that, I would get some amount of people. I would be able to eventually grow my book of business to a sustainable level. Might have a hard time living off of close to nothing for a year or two, but eventually I would get to a point where it is livable. Or I could try to create a system where the amount of people coming to me, or the number of people who are going to say yes to me, or the right type of person I'm finding, is significantly higher compared to just completely random. There are multiple factors I just touched on, and that's some of what we're going to be touching on during this stream. But I just wanted to clarify that there's a big difference between straight hustle and systematically trying to scale business. So, first question we have here is, how can small business decide whether to scale or to stay lean? And this is one that I personally think I have struggled with quite a bit over the last 6 months, is when you are first starting, let's say you do have 5 clients. Are you leaning more towards the stay lean, pure hustle, just get the next client so that you can get to a point where instead of saying you have 5 and your website has, 2 or 3 testimonials, maybe you have 10 or 20 or 30, or it looks like you are a full-fledged business, not to mention having some revenue in the door so you actually have something to live off of. This can be a perfectly viable first step, and honestly, I think for most people that's where they're probably going to have to start, because most of the tools that let you scale cost money. The world we live in is run off of money. So being able to take a lot of effort up front and get your first clients, it's usually going to be a necessity, and it depends on what industry you're in. Like, for example, with wealth management, there is so much trust that is a piece of it, and there are a lot of clients where at a certain level, I can't even really do that much. It's like, yeah, pay off your debt and save an emergency fund, and that's the whole conversation. Versus other industries, you can sell a product for $25 and anybody can be your customer. It really depends on what you are selling. But no matter how you crack the egg, at some point at the beginning, you're probably going to have to just get your first initial clients in the door. Then there's the question of like, how do you scale? Meaning, at what point do you shift from I'm spending a lot of my time trying to prospect with new people to I want to actually scale this into a system? It's going to depend. You obviously are going to need funds to be able to fund any sort of new system. Whether you are paying for tools to be able to do better outreach, going back to our door-to-door example, if you're doing door-to-door sales, pretty much free. If you are trying to cold call or cold email, well, getting those are now a lot harder than it used to be. With so much spam out there, you have to pay for tools like ZoomInfo or Hunter.io or Apollo.io or like some of these bigger tools where they're not like ungodly expensive, but like you do have to pay for them. And if you're starting off as a side hustle while you have your main job or you are in school, yeah, you're probably going to have to pay some money for those tools. So when you are starting to get a more systematic approach, having the funds, step one, and you're going to need some sort of emergency fund on top of that. So it's like there's definitely a window of time that takes. 2, depending on the type of client you're trying to get, it might be that you're forced to take more of a systematic approach earlier. I think the more exclusive a person you're trying to find, the more important tools become. Take, for example, you're trying to find business to business selling jet engines. There might be 100 people in the country you need to talk to. You're really going to need some tools to be able to find those people and actually come across in a pleasant way. Instead of just cold calling them 50 times, maybe you see them at a trade show, maybe you send them a LinkedIn connection, maybe you like one of their posts, Finding these people becomes a big part of the conversation. So when you're thinking about what does that transition timeline look like, you need funds, and then you also need to think about how exclusive of a person you're trying to find. And then 3, what type of outreach do you want your brand to actually look like? If you are coming in with the thought that I only want to approach people in a way that really screams good things about my business, maybe you don't love cold calling. Maybe you don't love cold email. Meaning if you're the type of person when you receive it, it drives you nuts, are you going to want to do that to somebody else? Sometimes you're kind of forced to. Other times you might be able to find ways around it. Maybe you're running ads, helping sponsor events, maybe you host a dinner, maybe you're finding ways to network. There are multiple ways to get a hold of people, but this is all part of the consideration of when I'm trying to scale in terms of either the quality of person I'm trying to find or scaling the number of people I can find. The industry you're in and exactly what you're selling become a very large piece of the consideration. What's one common mistake business owners make when trying to grow quickly? 2 things. First one, getting stuck at just the hustle stage of things. If you are trying to get your first initial clients, this is fantastic. But after that, if you are trying to grow your business to, a $100 million business, the same way that you got from 0 to 100,000, it's going to be much more difficult. It's not to say that you couldn't use the same prospecting method, but you might have to hire somebody. For example, if you built your business off of cold calling, you're probably going to have to start hiring other people eventually, and not just you making the cold calls all yourself, because you only have so many hours per day. You still have to service all the new clients you got. So at some point, you're going to have to make adjustments. The second thing is trying way too many things. I know for me personally, when I'm considering how do I scale versus hustle at things, meaning kind of the 10x versus 2x mentality, I want to try a bunch of things. It's much more exciting to try something new than it is to just sit down, get better at something, continue to get better at it, especially when you hit paywalls. I know when I take cold email, for example, started doing some of it, found, this looks interesting. then you realize to get to scale, there's a lot more investment needed to actually do that. So I can either do a little bit of it, or I can invest further and further into it and really scale it. And it's very easy to get stuck into the, let me try this for a month, ooh, hit a wall, let me try this for a month, ooh, don't like that, on to the next thing, and keep doing that over and over and over again, and all of a sudden, a year or two's gone by, and you still don't have any system. So picking something, being okay with the fact that it's going to take some investment, and then really finding a system that works for you, that's not something that you always see out of new business owners. And so much of this is like, wow, this is something I lived through recently. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying some different methodologies to start off with. I know for me personally, I feel like I've tried everything. I came in thinking I was just going to be networking, tabling at events, doing some content, and would just kind of naturally grow from there. Have tried cold calling, cold emailing, LinkedIn messages, have tried leaving tons of comments on things. I have been pretty much any method that exists, I have probably tried to some degree. And the funny thing is, even after you say, I'm trying that and I don't like it no more, I found that I'm still 2 or 3 months later considering it's maybe I just didn't approach it the right way. And it's not that mentality is a bad thing, but it's very easy to get stuck into the try this, try this, try this, try this. And eventually you just have to draw a line in the sand and just pick one. I know for me that's looking a lot more like running ads than it is trying to cold call or email or whatnot, just given the level of trust needed at these things. And I do like content quite a bit. Interesting. Doesn't like my bit rate. How do you know when it's the right time to hire your first team member? I'm someone that prefers to have the cash flow available. If you're going to hire someone, especially a W-2 full benefits employee, not just some contractor you can let go at any time, specifically someone you are fully responsible for and they have no other means of income. Knowing for a fact that you have their income available as income from the business every year is essential. So, for example, I run off of a assets under management model. In order to make revenue, charge 1% on assets. If I want to hire somebody and pay them $60,000 per year, I need to have $6 million that I'm managing to have $60,000 in terms of revenue if I had no other expenses just to pay for them. Obviously, there are other expenses, so basically I'd probably have to have more like $10 million and then pay for things like compliance, any sort of help with any content or anything, and then hire this person. So in terms of when I think that happens, I think for a lot of people, they're going to be forced to be doing way more work than is probably reasonable out of one person for at least 2 to 3 years. I think it is not super common you see otherwise. I do think there are circumstances where you don't have to have the income available, but those tend to be more technology startups that are banking off of seed financing and then getting bought out by venture capital. I don't really think of those in the same sense as traditional grow your own business, and not necessarily an area I feel like I have as much expertise in, so would look somewhere else on that degree. What's the difference between working harder and working smarter in business? It's kind of the 10x versus 2x side of things again. I mean, when you look at the two different sides of, I can either push myself really hard to just keep trying to spend more hours prospecting, more cold calls, more emails, more doors knocked, versus trying to find the right person, trying to be able to have systems where I don't have to work as much and the system does more of it. You know, this is how you kind of end up with the balance between the two. How should business owners approach budgeting for aggressive growth? I think the number one rule in business is to not go out of business. So even if you are trying to grow aggressively, I think that you should find other ways to have money for the business. This is why I think starting with a job while you are starting a business, or starting a business, if it's in the same industry you were working, go find a job in a different industry that's bringing in some sort of income. I think even when you're trying to be aggressive about growth, I think you still need to have the money available to do it. And when you're trying to be aggressive, I think that looks like living off of $30,000 a year and trying to spend every extra little bit of money you have on the business, whether that's improving your own systems, whether that's advertisements, whether that's hiring somebody, trying to do everything to grow. And when I personally think of which tools that tends to look like to start off with, advertisements and prospecting tools. Back to what allows me to reach the most important person, whether it's Sales Navigator or getting their email or their phone number, it's one of those two things, or it might be paying for networking. What are the biggest financial risks of scaling too fast? Usually it's growing your expenses too fast compared to your revenue. If your expenses are bigger than your revenue, you have a big problem. And it's one thing to take down debt to start off your business, but you don't want to scale based off of just debt. That can get ugly quickly. And it's one thing if you have a formula for this amount of dollars in equals this amount of dollars in new customers, and I need to wait this amount of time to get my money back. If you know that exact formula and it has continued to work for months or years on end, maybe debt isn't such a crazy thing for the balancing of risk. When I think about other financial risks around scaling, when I think about that equation of money in versus revenue out, it's when you hit diminishing returns and that equation no longer works the same. That's a scary moment. If you're putting $5,000 of money towards ads per month, and then all of a sudden you're no longer getting one new client a month from that, you're getting maybe a client every 3 months. That gets scary if your expenses have slowly been scaling as a result. Hiring somebody, getting helpful software, like for example, I would love having some AI note taker thing during calls, but that's the type of thing you get once you're bigger. How can entrepreneurs balance short-term cash flow with long-term investments? This is where, again, that transition time becomes very difficult, and it becomes very industry-specific. And it's going to be a guess. When you're trying to figure out when to make certain investments, you're taking an educated guess. And the more data you have, the better. The more customers you have coming in, the more extra cash you have available, and the more income you've already built up and more sustained your business is, the easier it's going to be. Most of the time, you're not going to have much of any of that. So when you're picking these things, trying to best keep in mind what has the highest probability of working and what can get you to this is at least livable stage, I think is the biggest consideration. I think any business, if you can get past the first 2 or 3 years and get to I can live off of $40,000 or $50,000 if I absolutely need to, pay my rent, pay my insurance, I can go to the hospital if I get in a car accident, that's like the number one, how do I get there first, and then we can start considering how do I get some of these scaling tools to work. How do you decide whether to reinvest profits or take a personal draw? What you're trying to do with your business, what goals you have in mind, I think is a big deal for this. If you're trying to grow your business into a $10 million plus enterprise, I think that you are going to be forced to reinvest most of the time. I think the personal draw side of things is going to have to wait for a long time. If you are someone who is trying to use your business as more so just a way to not have to have a job, and you're trying to use it as a way to more enjoy life, and you're considering it kind of almost more of like a consulting type role, then I think a personal draw is not so bad. And If you're someone who's okay if the business doesn't ever like just explode in value and you're more so trying to have a good, decent life, again, I think a personal draw and finding the balance between reinvestment and personal draw becomes much more of a consideration. I think how much money you're making also becomes a big part of that conversation. If you're already at a point where your net income, like take-home pay, is over $100,000, it becomes a lot easier to have a good balance between reinvesting in the business versus taking a personal draw. If you're only making $40,000 or $50,000 a year to take home to live off of, everything beyond that point kind of has to be reinvested into the business to get to a point where it's like you can sustainably take personal draws, because otherwise you just get stuck into this point where the business never really grows and you probably would have been better off just having a job. So where you are in your journey and how much profit you have every year makes a big difference on that consideration. Let's see. What's the best way to plan for taxes when your business income fluctuates? This is where the quarterly estimates become very important. This is obligated out of the government. They make it so that you have to have quarterly estimates on taxes if you are profitable as a business. That means that it usually keeps you on track, but I think just having regular check-ins about how much money you're making and then making sure there's taxes set aside is a big part of it. Now, when you talk about fluctuations, sometimes a business will make damn near no money for 6 months and then all of a sudden be making just bonkos dollars for like 1 month. For example, businesses that go off of large contracts or projects. You get some new project, you fulfill the contract, you get paid $120,000, and then you get a new contract, but you don't finish that project for another 8 months. Well, it's kind of hard to estimate, are we going to get done on time? There are a lot of different things that can come in mind, especially if the amount of money you're going to get paid for the project is variable as well, because that can happen with a lot of business models. So if it fluctuates or you have a seasonal business, I think trying to err on the conservative side helps a lot, meaning having a stockpile of cash helps a lot. I personally view that most businesses having a year of expenses for the business in cash in some sort of money market fund or treasuries or some form where they can get a hold of it as needed is very helpful. And I think especially when you have employees, because that tends to be a larger expense that just can't, it's shitty to get rid of. I guess I'll put it that way. How can thinking bigger change the way you approach daily decisions? When you're thinking about how do I move the business forward, that's a question that is constantly on my mind. Sometimes it becomes less so about how can I just hustle harder? How can I get more energy out of myself? How many more cups of coffee do I need to have? How many more hours do I need to spend doing this mundane activity I don't want to be doing? Less of the conversation and more so trying to outthink your situation. What system is going to better solve my situation? And sometimes it's little things, you take on a new piece of software. You start using it. You run into issues. Maybe you should go spend 4 hours reading the manual, watching some YouTube videos, trial and error your way through the process. When you're considering what to do with your afternoon, software versus knock some doors, when you're thinking bigger, sometimes the software afternoon becomes more of a consideration. What's the role of patience in building a business versus seeking quick wins? Sometimes you don't have the opportunity to have the patience, meaning you can be as patient as you want, but if you don't have any quick wins, you don't have a business. There's a balance that has to be found, especially at the beginning. When you are first starting, you, again, have to get to the point where you have a livable income at some point because you only have so much runway to work with. If you have outside income that's supporting you, that really helps. But you're, again, trying to get to the point where maybe you don't have to have an outside income. So, your business has to be able to support itself at some point, which means that you have to get it off the ground. And then once you're to that point, then starting to be able to take in the balance of patience versus quick wins becomes more important. I think the further along you are in the business, the more you can afford to lean into patience and making something work. Even when patient, it's still important to analyze what you're doing. And there are some things where you know the timeline for roughly how long it should take to work. Take content, for example. This is something that could take 5 to 10 years to see much of anything out of. Versus if I start running ads, I should see some sort of results within 3 to 6 months. Versus I'm starting to do cold outreach with some phone calls. I would assume I'm starting to see something within 1 to 2 months of at least some sort of new appointment set up. What tool you're applying patience to really depends on the timeline. And just going through Reddit or some sort of AI platform to get an estimate on what have other people experienced can make a big difference. How do you avoid burnout while aiming for ambitious goals? As someone who is currently severely burnt out, I can tell you that it's a hard balance to find. Going on vacation on Monday through Thursday, which should help quite a bit, but I think the main balance when you're trying to not completely burn out is to not get so into just the excitement. Really knowing down, these are the main things that are going to drive growth for the business. These are the main activities I have to get done to be able to keep the service of the business afloat. There's the current customers versus how do I get new customers. And beyond that, your own personal entertainment and excitement with new ideas, it's a very easy way to get overly ambitious and get burnt out by trying to do too many things at once. This sounds just so ironic coming out of my mouth recently. Here I was a few hours ago trying to think of if I should do more things. I think that the boredom is a big struggle for a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think I fall into the same bucket, honestly. The wanting to constantly try something new or get something to work and finally get to the point where you don't have to worry about nearly as much, and you can do this at more of just I'm enjoying myself type pace. But I don't know. I think if you get too caught up in I have to just find something new versus giving the things you're trying the breathing room to really start to work, it's easy to get burnt out. What habits help business owners maintain focus on high impact work? Having set time where you get to work on just the most important or the most I need to just grind it out activities for the day. For me, I get up at 6 in the morning, I walk my dog, have a little breakfast, and usually by 6:30 or 7, I am down, I post stuff, and then I just work on whatever the hell needs done. This usually is 3 or 4 hours in the morning, and before it's even lunchtime, I have grinded out the hardest stuff for the day. I think for a lot of people, something similar. It doesn't have to be the morning, there just needs to be some time of day where you sit down and you just do the stuff that needs done. Usually it's going to be fairly grindy in nature, especially within the first 5 to 10 years. Are there some times where it's just you got to do that admin thing, or you need to have that meeting, or yes, those count. But getting the I'm going to move the business forward stuff done is important. And then second piece to that, you have all your crap done. At some point, you're going to get good and tired. Having room to let your brain breathe and to think and to consider what could I be doing a little bit better during that I'm going to hit it hard time really helps. I know I enjoy doing this either when I'm in the shower or the car or at the gym. I get a lot of ideas. I will work my butt off and then go work out. Gives me an hour or two of just brain wanders, and then all of a sudden I get all these ideas. This can be a bad thing when you start getting overly ambitious, right back to the burnout, but it can be really helpful when you are trying to make sure you were doing the right things with that time. How do you measure success beyond just revenue? Profitability, for one. Revenue without profits is not very helpful. But two, for me personally, actually making an impact with the people that you are selling something to makes a big difference. For me, someone being financially secure so they can actually focus on the things that are important to them makes a big difference. If someone loses their job, someone passes away, starts having kids, wants a wedding, wants to go on vacation, the things that cost money and then not having to worry about the money because the money's already there, good stuff. Knowing that what you are actually doing for someone is decent, I think, is one of the biggest marks of success. And I think being able to see a little bit of that in the conversations you're having with people feels powerful. What's a simple way to prioritize tasks that actually drive growth? Being able to, at least once a week, I know for me it's almost daily, look at your situation and go, where am I on kind of the 10-year roadmap of growth? Here's my goal. Here's where I'm at. What needs to happen in between? I'm very early on, so I need to do a lot of grindy type activities and make sure I have cash flow available to deal with all these things. If I'm 2 or 3 years in, maybe I'm starting to work a lot more on what can scale the business a lot more. Just being able to take that step back and have a bit of a roadmap. Doesn't need to be perfect, just at least a rough idea of where am I in the trajectory of where I'm trying to take this business. How do you know when to delegate versus do it yourself? The activities where you're not adding value tend to be the ones you should probably delegate the earliest. For example, I'm pretty crappy at editing, so outsourcing that makes a lot of sense for me because someone else can actually do it even better than I can. Outreach. I'm much better at sales than I am at marketing. Having someone help with marketing makes a lot of sense to outsource. Or cleaning services. I can do them, but when I get to a point where I'm so busy I can make money, making $70 an hour doing something else, and someone else can do this for $15, $20 an hour, outsource. It really depends on the part of the business. Scheduling, being able to take care of a lot of things. And I think the one complicating part of this is AI can do so many things so fast now that there's a lot of things that I maybe would have paid someone to do previously that I just do myself now because I can do them in under 10 minutes. Outsourcing something that you can do in under 10 or 15 minutes a day feels like it's like an unnecessary liability. And if you have a bunch of those tasks and you can outsource all of them to one person, that feels a lot better. But if it's just one thing, for me, I wake up every morning and post stuff, and it takes me 30 to 45 minutes every day. It's very mundane. It's literally just moving stuff or making descriptions for videos. AI is very helpful. Hardly anyone's ever reading that. But it's something that needs done. But it takes under 5 minutes. So, I'm not hiring somebody to do that. Being able to just go, task that doesn't add much value, get a whole bunch of them, start outsourcing those when you have the money, then start focusing on the higher value stuff. And if it's really small, AI does a lot of good stuff. How can technology help streamline operations without overcomplicating things? Topical. Again, I think it's very easy to try and use lots of different pieces of software and try to automate way too much. If what you are doing only saves you 5 to 10 minutes a day, it's probably not that important to consider. If this is an activity you're doing hundreds of times and it saves you 5 to 10 seconds each time, anything where the number of repetitions just keeps scaling, tech, very helpful. If it's something that can save you more than 10 to 15 minutes every time you do it, again, tech, super helpful. But outside of that, meaning really little things, probably not. If you're at a point where you don't have a lot of cash and the technology will save you time, but it won't like it costs you quite a bit, because trying to find any software worth a crap for less than $1,000 a year is like, ew, that's rough. There's some like micro little Chrome extensions, but like we're talking main things you use here. Like, I think unless you're at a point where you're making more than $100K a year, again, probably wouldn't consider it. Even then, I would really start to look at how much do I want to go into software versus hiring somebody and balancing that. What's a common operational bottleneck that slows down scaling? I think money is the number one. I think one of the hardest things in business is, especially early on, is transitions with cash. Let's say you're working full time, you're in the business, you can only make so much at your current job. And you want to be able to transition into being full time. Well, your amount of time you're working on the business kind of just keeps going up, unless you have something where you sign a client on and then they just pay you for nothing, or, if you're actually working for them on a regular basis, the more service you have to do, the harder it becomes to manage business and job at the same time. So that transition moving into working on the business full time, difficult. Transitions in terms of scaling tools, again, having the money for that, difficult. This is, again, why I think wealth management for business owners is so important. It's cash flow timing, it's being able to get the most out of your taxes, it's getting the most out of all of the tools available to you. How do you basically take the work you did and actually get the most money for it, and then take that money and use it on the most helpful things and make the transition smoother? It's tricky. How can small changes in process have big results in business efficiency? If you are doing something over and over and over again, and you can save 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, 15 seconds there, like, huge. Like, I know for me, if I'm posting every single day, if I can do that in 25 minutes instead of 35, 10 minutes every day, I mean, that adds up to many, many hours over the year, and over many years, that's many, many, many hours. And I think when you apply that at more and more scale, it becomes more important. My throat is dying, so I think I'm going to call it here, but I will see you guys in the next one.